Lily Chen was 17 years old when she stood backstage at the biggest talent competition in the country. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Around her, other contestants were warming up. Some had expensive instruments. Some had coaches whispering last-minute advice. Some wore designer clothes that probably cost more than everything Lily owned. She looked down at her own dress. It was blue with small white flowers. She had found it at a thrift store for $12. Her mother had stayed up late the night before to fix a small tear near the bottom. Nobody would notice, her mother had said. And she was right. Nobody did notice. Because nobody was looking at Lily at all. That was fine. She was used to being invisible. In her hands, she held a violin case. The case was old and worn. The leather was cracked in several places, and one of the latches did not close properly anymore. But what was inside that case meant everything to her. It was her grandmother's violin, the only thing she had left of the woman who had changed her life. The show was called Rising Stars. It aired live every Saturday night. And millions of people watched from their homes. The winners got record deals, scholarships, and opportunities that could change their futures forever. The losers went home and were forgotten by the next morning. But it was not the competition that scared Lily the most. It was the judges. There were 4 of them sitting behind a long table facing the stage. 3 of them were known for being tough but fair. They gave honest feedback. They encouraged young talent. They remembered what it was like to be nervous and new. But the 4th judge was different. His name was Victor Harrington. Victor Harrington was 71 years old. He had white hair that was always perfectly combed. He wore suits that cost more than most people made in a month. He had conducted orchestras in London, Vienna, Paris, and New York. He had trained musicians who now performed at the most famous concert halls in the world. He had written books about classical music that were taught in universities, and he was known for being absolutely ruthless. Victor did not believe in gentle criticism. He believed that talent was rare, and most people were wasting his time. He had made contestants cry on live television. He had told a 15-year-old pianist that she should find a different dream. He had walked out in the middle of performances he found boring. The internet was full of clips of his cruelest moments. Some people hated him for it. But most people watched the show specifically to see what he would say next. The producers loved him. Controversy meant ratings. And Victor Harrington was very good at controversy. Lily had watched those clips. She had seen what he did to people. And now she was about to walk onto that stage and play for him. A production assistant with a headset tapped her on the shoulder. "You're up in 5 minutes," he said. "Get ready." Lily nodded. She could not speak. Her throat felt too tight. She found a quiet corner away from the other contestants and opened her violin case. Inside, the instrument lay on faded red velvet. It was not new. It was not shiny. There were small scratches on the wood from decades of use. The strings had been replaced many times, but the body of the violin was original. It had been made in Germany almost 100 years ago. To most people, it probably looked like something that belonged in a pawn shop. But to Lily, it was the most precious thing in the world. She picked it up carefully and held it against her shoulder. The wood was warm. It always felt warm to her, like it remembered all the hands that had held it before. Her grandmother used to say that a violin holds memories. Every song ever played on it leaves a mark that you cannot see but can feel. This violin had been played thousands of times. It had seen joy and sorrow. It had traveled across oceans. It had survived things that Lily was only beginning to understand. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "Grandma," she whispered, "please help me." The production assistant returned. "You're on. Let's go." Lily followed him down a narrow hallway. She could hear the crowd in the auditorium. The previous contestant had just finished, and people were clapping. Then there was the sound of the host's voice, loud and cheerful, saying something she could not quite make out. And then she heard her name. "Please welcome to the stage, Lily Chen." She walked out into the bright lights. The stage was huge. It felt like walking onto a football field. The lights were so bright that she could barely see the audience. But she could feel them. Thousands of eyes watching, millions more watching from home. The judges sat at their table, looking up at her. Lily walked to the center of the stage and stood in front of the microphone. Her legs felt weak. She was afraid she might fall. Victor Harrington looked at her the way someone might look at a fly that had landed on their dinner. His eyes moved from her face to her dress, to her violin case. His expression did not change, but Lily could tell what he was thinking. He was not impressed. One of the other judges smiled at her kindly. "Hello there," she said. "What's your name and where are you from?" "I'm Lily Chen," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than she wanted it to. "I'm from Milwaukee." "And how old are you, Lily?" 17. "That's wonderful. And what are you going to perform for us today?" "I'm going to play Paganini's Caprice No. 24. There was a small murmur from the crowd. Even Lily knew why. That piece was considered one of the hardest violin compositions ever written. Professional musicians struggled with it. For a 17-year-old to attempt it was either very brave or very foolish. Victor Harrington leaned forward. For the first time, he looked interested, but not in a good way. He looked like someone who had just been given a gift he was about to enjoy unwrapping. "Paganini," he said slowly. "That's quite ambitious. Tell me, young lady, where did you study? Which conservatory?" Lily swallowed hard. "I didn't study at a conservatory, sir." Victor raised an eyebrow. "Private lessons, then? Who was your teacher?" "I didn't have a private teacher. Not really. I mostly taught myself." The auditorium went quiet. Victor stared at her like she had just said something offensive. "You taught yourself," he repeated flatly. "Yes, sir. I watched videos online. And my grandmother. She helped me when I was younger. Before she passed away." Victor leaned back in his chair. He glanced at the judge, sitting next to him, and said something that Lily could not hear. But she saw them both smile. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of people sharing a private joke at someone else's expense. The other judge covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Lily felt her face grow hot. She knew what they were thinking. They thought she was a joke. A silly girl from Milwaukee who had watched some YouTube videos and thought she could play one of the hardest pieces in classical music history. They were already preparing their criticism. They were already deciding she had wasted their time. Victor waved his hand dismissively. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the silent auditorium. "This should be interesting. Let's hear what the internet has taught you, shall we?" A few people in the audience laughed nervously. Lily stood there, feeling very small, feeling like everyone was waiting for her to fail. But then she thought of her grandmother. She thought of the promise she had made. She thought of all those nights practicing until her fingers bled. All those hours spent rewinding videos and trying again and again until she got it right. She lifted her violin to her shoulder. She raised her bow, and she began to play. The first note rang out across the auditorium like a voice calling from somewhere far away. It was clear and strong and full of something that made people stop breathing for just a moment. Lily's fingers moved across the strings. Her bow glided with a smoothness that surprised even her. All those years of practice, all those late nights when everyone else was asleep, all those times she had played until her fingers were raw and bleeding, it was all coming together right now on this stage. The piece she was playing was called Caprice No. 24 by Paganini. It was written almost 200 years ago by a man who many believed had sold his soul to the devil in exchange for his talent. The music was fast and complicated. It required fingers that could move like lightning. It required perfect control. It required years of training at the best schools with the best teachers. Lily had none of that. She had learned from grainy videos on the internet. She had practiced on a violin that most professionals would laugh at. She had never taken a single formal lesson in her life, but she had something else, something that could not be taught. The music filled the auditorium. People in the audience leaned forward in their seats. A woman in the third row put her hand over her heart. A man near the back wiped his eyes without understanding why. Victor Harrington sat very still. His face showed nothing. But his eyes were watching Lily's hands with an intensity that made the other judges nervous. 30 seconds passed. Lily was lost in the music now. She had forgotten about the cameras. She had forgotten about the millions of people watching. She had forgotten about everything except the feeling of her grandmother's violin against her shoulder and the sound it was making under her hands. And then Victor raised his hand. Stop. The word cut through the music like a knife. Lily's bow froze in midair. The last note hung in the silence for a moment, then faded away. She looked at Victor. Her heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. I said stop, Victor repeated. His voice was cold and flat. The auditorium was completely silent. 12 million people were watching from their homes. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Victor stood up slowly from his chair. He was tall, even at 71 years old. He walked around the judges' table and stood at the front of the stage, looking up at Lily like a teacher about to scold a misbehaving student. Let me tell you something, he said. His voice was calm, but there was something sharp underneath it. I have been judging musical talent for over 40 years. I have heard thousands of performers. I have trained musicians who now play at the greatest concert halls in the world. I have dedicated my entire life to the pursuit of excellence in classical music. He paused to let his words sink in. And in all those years, I have never seen anything quite like this. For one brief moment, Lily felt a spark of hope. Maybe he had heard something in her playing. Maybe he understood. But then Victor continued, and the hope died. This, he said, gesturing at Lily with disgust, is exactly what is wrong with music today. Children who watch a few videos on their phones think they can bypass decades of proper training. They think they can skip the hard work. They think they can download excellence like an app. His voice grew louder with each sentence. Your technique is sloppy. Your posture is completely wrong. Your timing is inconsistent. And that instrument, he pointed at her grandmother's violin, belongs in a museum. Or perhaps a garbage bin. And, someone in the audience gasped. One of the other judges shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but Victor was not finished. Let me be very clear, he said, turning to face the cameras. Talent requires discipline. It requires sacrifice. It requires years of investment and training under proper guidance. You cannot learn to play Paganini from YouTube. It is an insult to every serious musician who has ever dedicated their life to this art form. He turned back to Lily. His eyes were cold. I am sorry that you came all this way. I am sorry that nobody in your life told you the truth before now. But the truth is this. You are not ready for this stage. You may never be ready. Some dreams are simply not meant to come true. Lily felt tears burning in her eyes. She blinked hard, trying to keep them from falling. She would not cry in front of this man. She would not give him that satisfaction. But it was hard, so hard. Everything he said felt like a punch to her stomach. All those years of work. All those sacrifices her family had made. All those nights when she had believed that maybe, just maybe, she could do something special with her life. And now this man was telling her it was all worthless. That she was worthless. That her grandmother's violin was garbage. The other judges looked uncomfortable. One of them opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then closed it again. Nobody wanted to disagree with Victor Harrington. Not on live television. Not in front of millions of viewers. Victor walked back to his seat and sat down heavily. He picked up a glass of water and took a sip. As casual as if he had just commented on the weather. You may leave now, he said without looking at her. Lily stood frozen. Her legs would not move. Her hands were shaking so badly that her bow was trembling against the strings. Leave. He wanted her to leave. To walk off this stage in shame in front of everyone. To go back to Milwaukee and forget this ever happened. To accept that she was nothing and would always be nothing. She thought about her mother sitting at home watching this. Her mother who had worked double shifts for years to keep food on the table. Her mother who had never once told Lily to give up on her dreams. She thought about her little brother who had told all his friends at school to watch tonight, who had made a poster that said "Go Lily" and hung it in his bedroom window. She thought about her grandmother, the woman who had given her this violin, the woman who had spent hours teaching her when she was just a little girl, the woman who had believed in her when nobody else did. Her grandmother had never gotten to live her dream. Life had stolen that from her. But before she died, She had held Lily's hand and made her promise one thing. "Play for me," she had whispered. "Play for all the times I couldn't." Lily looked at Victor Harrington sitting behind his fancy table in his expensive suit. She looked at the cameras pointing at her face. She looked at the thousands of people in the audience waiting for her to walk away in defeat, and she made a decision. She was not leaving. Not yet. Her hands stopped shaking. Her spine straightened. She lifted her chin and looked directly at Victor. "Sir," she said. Her voice was small at first, but it grew stronger with each word. "With respect, you only heard 30 seconds. Victor looked up from his glass of water. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Contestants did not talk back, especially not after he had dismissed them. "Excuse me?" he said. "You only listened for 30 seconds, Lily repeated. "My grandmother taught me that every piece of music tells a complete story. You wouldn't judge a book by reading only one paragraph. You wouldn't judge a movie by watching only the first minute." The audience stirred. Someone whispered something. A camera operator zoomed in on Lily's face. Victor's expression changed from surprise to anger. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. "Young lady," he said slowly, "I do not need to hear the whole piece to know that." "Please," Lily interrupted. She knew she was taking a huge risk. She knew this could make everything worse. But she had nothing left to lose. "Give me 2 more minutes. That's all I'm asking. 2 minutes. If you still think I'm wasting your time after that, I'll leave. I'll walk off this stage and never perform again. But please, let me finish." The auditorium was electric with tension. The other judges exchanged glances. The producer in the control room was frantically signaling to keep the cameras rolling. This was the kind of television moment that people would talk about for years. Victor stared at Lily for a long moment. His face was unreadable. Then, slowly, he leaned back in his chair. 2 minutes, he said coldly. "Not a second more. And when you fail, you will leave this stage quietly. Do you understand?" Not. Lily nodded. She raised her violin once more. She closed her eyes and thought of her grandmother. And then she played like her life depended on it. To understand what happened next on that stage, you need to know a story that Lily herself did not fully understand until she was much older. It is the story of her grandmother, Mei Ling Chen, and the secret she carried for more than 50 years. Mei Ling was born in Shanghai, China, in 1942. Her family was not rich, but they were comfortable. Her father was a professor at the university. Her mother taught piano lessons to children in the neighborhood. Music filled their small apartment like sunlight. When Mei Ling was 5 years old, her mother noticed something unusual. The little girl would sit perfectly still whenever music played. She would close her eyes and move her tiny fingers in the air, as if playing along with invisible instruments. One day, her mother placed a small violin in her hands, just to see what would happen. What happened was a miracle. Within months, Mei Ling was playing pieces that children twice her age struggled with. Within a year, she was performing for audiences. By the time she was 10, she was being called a prodigy. People came from all over the city just to hear the little girl with the magical fingers. Her teacher was a man named Professor Zhou Wei, one of the most respected musicians in all of China. He had trained concert violinists who performed in Europe and America. He was strict and demanding. But he saw something special in Mei Ling. Something rare. "This girl," he told her parents, "has a gift that comes once in a generation. She will play for kings and presidents. She will make the world weep with her music." Her parents were so proud. They saved every penny they had to buy her a proper violin. It was made in Germany in 1920 by a master craftsman. It cost more money than her father made in 2 years, but they knew it was worth it. Their daughter was destined for greatness. By the time Mei Ling was 16, she had won every competition in China. She had been invited to study in Vienna. She had her whole life ahead of her, and it was going to be beautiful. And then everything changed. In 1966, something called the Cultural Revolution began in China. It was a dark and terrible time. The government decided that intellectuals and artists were enemies of the people. Professors were dragged from their homes, musicians were beaten in the streets, books were burned, instruments were smashed. Mei Ling's father was taken away one night and never came back. Her mother was forced to stand in the town square while people shouted insults at her. Their apartment was destroyed. Everything they owned was thrown into the street. And Mei Ling's music? It was declared a crime. Playing Western classical music was seen as a betrayal of China. Anyone caught doing it could be imprisoned or worse. The violin that her parents had sacrificed so much to buy was supposed to be destroyed. Soldiers came to their home looking for it, but Mei Ling had hidden it. She had wrapped it in old blankets and buried it beneath the floorboards of a neighbor's shed. She told no one, not even her mother. For the next 10 years, Mei Ling did not play a single note. She worked in a factory during the day and came home exhausted every night. She watched as everything she had dreamed of was taken away. She watched as her mother grew sick from grief and hard labor. She watched as the world she knew disappeared. But she never forgot the violin hidden under those floorboards, and late at night, when she could not sleep, she would close her eyes and play music in her mind. She would move her fingers against her blanket, remembering how it felt to hold a bow, remembering the sound that used to fill her heart with joy. In 1978, the Cultural Revolution finally ended. By then, Mei Ling was 36 years old. Her mother had passed away. Her teacher, Professor Zhou Wei, had died in a labor camp. Everyone who had believed in her was gone. She dug up the violin from its hiding place. It was still there, waiting for her. She opened the case and touched the strings, and she wept, but she did not play. Something inside her had been broken. The girl who had dreamed of performing for the world was gone. In her place was a woman who had learned that dreams could be stolen, that hope could be crushed, that the world was not always kind to people with gifts. Mei Ling left China with nothing but her violin and a small bag of clothes. She came to America and settled in Milwaukee, where no one knew her name or her story. She got a job at a laundromat, washing other people's clothes for minimum wage. She never told anyone about her past. She never told anyone that she had once been called the greatest young violinist in China. She just wanted to disappear. But music has a way of refusing to stay silent. Every night, after the laundromat closed and the streets grew quiet, Mei Ling would lock the doors and take out her violin. She would stand among the washing machines and dryers, and she would play. She played for her father who never came home. She played for her mother who died of a broken heart. She played for Professor Zhou Wei who had believed in her. She played for the girl she used to be, the one who thought the world was full of possibility. The music echoed off the walls of that empty laundromat. Nobody heard it except Mei Ling herself. But she played anyway, because music was the only thing that still made her feel alive. One night, something unexpected happened. Mei Ling was playing a slow, sad piece when she heard a sound behind her. She spun around, terrified that someone had discovered her secret. But it was not a stranger. It was a little girl, no more than 4 years old, standing in the doorway with wide eyes and an open mouth. She had snuck downstairs from the apartment above, where she lived with her mother. It was Lily. Mei Ling froze. She did not know what to do. She had kept her secret for so long. She had promised herself that she would never let anyone see this part of her again. But the little girl did not run away. She did not look scared or confused. Instead, she walked slowly toward Mei Ling, her eyes fixed on the violin. "Pretty," she whispered. "So pretty." And in that moment, something in Mei Ling's heart cracked open. She saw herself in this child. The same wide eyes, the same wonder, the same pure love for sound and melody. She knelt down and held out the violin. "Would you like to try?" she asked softly. Lily nodded. Mei Ling placed the instrument in those tiny hands. She showed her how to hold the bow. She guided her fingers to the strings. Lily made a sound. It was scratchy and rough. Not beautiful at all. But when she heard it, her face lit up with the biggest smile Mei Ling had ever seen. That was the beginning. From that night on, Mei Ling taught Lily in secret. After the laundromat closed, after Lily's mother went to sleep, grandmother and granddaughter would meet downstairs. They would play together for hours. Mei Ling passed on everything she knew, every technique, every emotion, every secret that Professor Zhou Wei had taught her decades ago. She never told Lily about Shanghai. She never told her about the Cultural Revolution or the dreams that had been stolen from her. Those memories were too painful, but she did tell her one thing, again and again. Music lives in the heart first, Mei Ling would say, pressing her hand against Lily's chest. Technique can be learned. Notes can be memorized. But soul? Soul is something you are born with, and you, my little one, have more soul than anyone I have ever known. Lily did not understand what her grandmother meant. She was too young. But she remembered those words. She carried them with her like a treasure. For 7 years, they played together in that laundromat. 7 years of secrets and music and love. And then, when Lily was 11 years old, Mei Ling got sick. The doctors said it was cancer. They said there was nothing they could do. In her final days, Mei Ling called Lily to her bedside. She was weak and thin, but her eyes were still bright. "I have something for you," she whispered. She pointed to the old violin case sitting in the corner of the room. "This is yours now," she said. "It has been waiting for you. Just like I was waiting for you." Lily started to cry. She did not want a violin. She wanted her grandmother to stay. Mei Ling took her hand and held it tight. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise me you will play for the world. Promise me you will finish what I could not." Lily nodded through her tears. "I promise, Grandma, I promise." Mei Ling smiled. It was a peaceful smile, full of something that looked like relief. 3 days later, she was gone. And now, 6 years after that night, Lily stood on a stage in front of millions of people, holding that same violin. The violin that had survived war and revolution. The violin that had been buried under floorboards and carried across oceans. The violin that held all of her grandmother's broken dreams. Victor Harrington had called it garbage. He had no idea what he was looking at, but he was about to find out. Lily closed her eyes and let the world disappear. The bright lights faded. The cameras faded. The thousands of faces staring at her faded. Even Victor Harrington, sitting behind his table with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, faded into nothing. All that remained was the violin against her shoulder and the bow in her hand. She thought about her grandmother. Not the sick woman in the hospital bed at the end, but the grandmother she remembered from those nights in the laundromat. The woman with gentle hands and sad eyes, who had shown her how to hold the bow correctly. The woman who had hummed along while Lily played, swaying softly to the music. The woman who had loved her more than anyone else in the world. "Play for me," her grandmother had whispered. "Play for all the times I couldn't." Oh, Lily took a deep breath, and then she began. The first notes were soft, almost too soft. People in the back of the auditorium leaned forward, straining to hear. The sound was delicate, like something fragile that might break if you touched it. But then the music began to grow. It rose like a wave building in the ocean. The notes came faster, stronger, more confident. Lily's fingers danced across the strings with a speed that seemed impossible. Her bow moved in long, sweeping strokes that made the violin sing in a voice that filled every corner of the room. This was not the same playing Victor had heard before. This was something different. Something raw and real and alive. In the audience, people began to react. A woman in the front row pressed her hand against her mouth. A man 3 rows back felt tears forming in his eyes and did not understand why. A teenage girl who had been looking at her phone put it down and stared at the stage, unable to look away. The music told a story. You did not need to know anything about classical music to understand it. You could feel it in your chest, in your bones, in the deepest parts of your heart. It was a story of loss, of dreams that had been taken away, of a little girl in Shanghai who had wanted to play for the world but never got the chance. It was a story of hope, of a grandmother who had passed her gift to her granddaughter, of a promise made in a hospital room, of love that continued even after death. It was a story of courage, of a 17-year-old girl from Milwaukee who had taught herself from videos on the internet, who had practiced until her fingers bled, who had stood on this stage and refused to walk away, even when everyone expected her to fail. The music soared higher and higher. Lily's whole body moved with it now. She was not just playing the violin. She was becoming the music itself. In the control room behind the stage, the producer sat frozen in front of his monitors. He had worked in television for 25 years. He had seen hundreds of performances, but he had never seen anything like this. "Are you getting this?" he whispered to his camera operators. "Tell me you're getting this." They were getting it. Every camera in the building was pointed at Lily. The close-up showed her face, her eyes still closed, her expression somewhere between pain and joy. The wide shot showed her small figure alone on that massive stage, filling the entire space with sound. At the judges' table, something strange was happening. Victor Harrington had not moved since Lily started playing. He sat completely still, his arms still crossed, his face still hard. But if you looked closely, really closely, you could see something changing in his eyes. The hardness was fading. The coldness was melting. Something else was taking its place. Something that looked almost like recognition. His hands, which had been clenched tight, slowly relaxed. His arms, which had been crossed defensively, slowly lowered to his sides. His jaw, which had been set in anger, slowly softened. He was listening. Really listening. Perhaps for the first time all night, the other judges noticed. They exchanged glances, not sure what to make of it. They had never seen Victor react this way to any performer, let alone one he had just humiliated on live television. The music reached its peak. The notes came so fast now that they blurred together into something that sounded almost superhuman. Lily's fingers were a blur of motion. Her bow flew across the strings like it had a life of its own. And then, just when it seemed like the music could not possibly go any higher, it changed. The fast notes slowed down. The loud sounds became soft again. The frantic energy transformed into something gentle and sad and beautiful. This was the final section of Paganini's Caprice No. 24. The part that most violinists rushed through, eager to finish the technically difficult piece. But Lily did not rush. She let each note breathe. She gave each sound its own space and time. It was like watching the sun set over the ocean, slow and peaceful and heartbreaking in its beauty. In the audience, people were openly crying now. Not just one or two, but dozens of them. They did not even try to hide it. The music had reached inside them and touched something they could not name. A grandmother in the fifth row thought about her own mother, who had passed away 10 years ago. A father near the back thought about his daughter, who had given up piano lessons because he told her she was not good enough. A young man in the balcony thought about all the dreams he had abandoned because he was afraid of failing. The music made them remember. It made them feel. It made them wish they had been braver, kinder, more willing to believe in impossible things. And then, with one final note that seemed to hang in the air forever, Lily stopped playing. Silence. Complete and total silence. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The whole auditorium was frozen in time. Then Lily opened her eyes. She looked out at the audience, at the thousands of faces staring back at her. She looked at the cameras, at the millions more watching from their homes. She looked at the judges' table, at the 3 judges who sat with tears streaming down their faces, and she looked at Victor Harrington. He was not crying, but he was not the same man who had mocked her just minutes ago. His face had changed completely. The arrogance was gone. The cruelty was gone. In its place was something that Lily could not identify. It looked almost like shock, or maybe wonder, or maybe something even deeper than that. For a long moment, their eyes met. The old maestro and the young girl. The man who had tried to crush her dreams, and the girl who had refused to let them die. Neither of them looked away. And then the silence broke. It started with one person clapping. then another, then 10 more, then 100. Then the entire auditorium exploded into the loudest applause Lily had ever heard. People jumped to their feet. They cheered. They screamed. They whistled and stomped and shouted her name. Lily, Lily, Lily. The sound washed over her like a wave. She stood on the stage, trembling, her grandmother's violin still pressed against her chest. She did not know what to do. She did not know what to say, so she did the only thing she could think of. She bowed. It was a small bow, almost shy. The kind of bow her grandmother had taught her to do after every performance, no matter how small the audience. Always show gratitude, Mei Ling used to say. The music is a gift. The listeners are a gift. Never forget that. Lily had not forgotten. The applause continued for what felt like hours. People did not want to stop. They did not want this moment to end. But eventually, slowly, the clapping faded. People sat back down in their seats. The cheering grew quiet. All eyes turned to the judges' table. It was time for the verdict. The other 3 judges spoke first. They said wonderful things. They called her performance breathtaking. They said she had a gift that could not be taught. They said they had never seen anything like it in all their years of judging. But everyone knew their opinions did not matter. Not really. There was only one voice that counted. Victor Harrington. He had remained silent throughout the other judges' comments. He sat very still, his hands folded on the table in front of him. His face was unreadable. Finally, when the other judges had finished speaking, the host turned to him. Victor, he said carefully, you were quite critical of Lily earlier in her performance. Do you have anything to say now? The auditorium held its breath. Victor did not answer right away. He stared at Lily for a long moment, his expression impossible to read. And then he did something that nobody expected. He stood up from his chair, walked around the judges' table, and climbed the stairs onto the stage. The audience gasped. This had never happened before. In all the years of the show, no judge had ever walked onto the stage during a performance evaluation. Victor stopped a few feet in front of Lily. Up close, she could see that his eyes were wet. Not quite tears, but close. He looked at her violin, the old, scratched instrument that he had called garbage. He looked at it like he was seeing it for the first time, and then he spoke. That violin, he said quietly. His voice was different now, softer, almost fragile. Where did you get it? Lily swallowed hard. It was my grandmother's, she said. She gave it to me before she died. Victor nodded slowly. His eyes never left the instrument. What was her name? He asked. Your grandmother. What was her name? Lily did not understand why he was asking, but something in his voice made her answer honestly. Mei Ling, she said. Her name was Mei Ling Chen, and in that moment, something happened that no one in that auditorium would ever forget. Victor Harrington, the most feared judge in television history, the man who had never shown emotion in 40 years of public life, closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there were tears streaming down his face. The auditorium was completely silent. 12 million people watching from home held their breath. Nobody understood what was happening. Nobody knew why the most powerful man in classical music was standing on stage with tears running down his face. Nobody except Victor Harrington himself. He stood there for a long moment, unable to speak. His shoulders, which had always been so straight and proud, seemed to sag under an invisible weight. When he finally found his voice, it was barely above a whisper. Mei Ling Chen, he said slowly, like he was tasting each syllable. I have not heard that name in almost 40 years. Lily stared at him. Her heart was pounding. She did not understand what was happening. You knew my grandmother? She asked. Victor nodded. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, not caring anymore who was watching. I was 23 years old, he began. His voice was shaking. It was 1965. I had just graduated from the Royal Academy in London, and I thought I knew everything about music. I thought I had heard the best violinists in the world. He paused, lost in a memory that was almost half a century old. And then I went to Shanghai. The audience leaned forward. The cameras zoomed in. Even the other judges sat frozen, hanging on every word. There was a private concert, Victor continued. Very small. Very exclusive. Only about 50 people in the room. I was invited by a professor I had met at a conference. He told me I had to hear this young woman play. He said she was the most talented violinist he had ever encountered. His eyes found Lily's violin again. The old, scratched instrument that he had mocked just minutes ago. She was 23 years old. The same age as me. She walked onto the stage in a simple white dress, carrying that exact violin. I remember thinking it looked old even then. I remember wondering why someone so talented did not have a better instrument. Victor's voice cracked, and then she started to play. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he was not a 71-year-old man standing on a television stage. He was a young student again, sitting in a small concert hall in Shanghai, hearing something that would change his life forever. It was Paganini, he said quietly. Caprice number 24. The same piece you just played. And it was the most beautiful thing I had ever heard in my life. Before or since, he opened his eyes and looked directly at Lily. I tried to find her afterward. I wanted to talk to her. I wanted to offer her a position with any orchestra in Europe. I wanted to tell her that she was going to be the greatest violinist of her generation. His voice broke completely, but she was gone. She had vanished, and no one would tell me where she went or what happened to her. I searched for months. I wrote letters. I made phone calls. Nothing. It was like she had never existed. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he made no effort to stop them. I never forgot her. For 40 years, I have carried the memory of that performance with me. I have compared every violinist I have ever heard to her, and none of them came close. Not one. He reached out slowly, his hand trembling, and touched the body of the violin that Lily was holding. I thought I would never hear that sound again, he whispered. I thought it was lost forever. And then tonight, a 17-year-old girl from Milwaukee walked onto this stage with her grandmother's violin and played the exact same piece. He looked into Lily's eyes. You play exactly like her. The same technique, the same emotion, the same soul. It is like hearing a ghost. Lily felt tears spilling down her own cheeks. All those years, she had known her grandmother was special. She had known the violin was important, but she had never known this. She had never known that her grandmother's music had touched someone so deeply that he remembered it 40 years later. She never told me, Lily said softly. She never told me any of this. She never talked about her past at all. Victor nodded sadly. I learned later what happened. The Cultural Revolution. The persecution of artists and intellectuals. I learned that many musicians from that era lost everything. Their careers. Their families. Their lives. He took a deep breath. Your grandmother survived, but her dream did not. She was supposed to change the world with her music. Instead, the world silenced her. He turned to face the audience and the cameras. I owe this young woman an apology, he said, his voice growing stronger. I owe her the most sincere apology of my entire life. Fivermander. 1810. I owe her the most sincere apology. He turned back to Lily. I was cruel to you tonight. I was arrogant and dismissive. I looked at your old violin and your thrift store dress, and I decided you were not worth my time. I did exactly what the world did to your grandmother. I tried to silence you before you even had a chance to speak. He shook his head slowly. I was wrong. I was so terribly wrong. Then Victor Harrington, the most feared judge in the history of the show, did something that nobody had ever seen him do. He bowed. Not a small, polite bow. A deep bow. The kind of bow that a student gives to a master. The kind of bow that shows complete and total respect. Your grandmother could not finish her journey, he said as he straightened up. But you can. You have her gift. You have her instrument. And now, you have the whole world watching. He placed his hand gently on Lily's shoulder. Win this competition. Get the training you deserve. Play on the greatest stages in the world. And when you do, remember that you are not just playing for yourself. You are playing for Mei-Ling Chen. You are finishing what she started. The audience could not hold back any longer. They erupted into applause so loud that it shook the walls of the auditorium. People were on their feet, crying and cheering at the same time. The other judges were openly sobbing. Even the camera operators were wiping their eyes. The host tried to speak, but his voice kept breaking. Finally, he managed to announce what everyone already knew. Lily Chen had won. Not just won the episode, won the entire competition. The other judges declared it unanimously. There was no need to see any other performers. There was no need to vote. What they had witnessed tonight was once in a lifetime. In the weeks that followed, everything changed. The video of Lily's performance spread across the internet like wildfire. Within 24 hours, it had been viewed 50 million times. Within a week, it had been viewed 200 million times. News stations around the world told her story. Newspapers wrote about the girl from Milwaukee who had taught herself violin from YouTube videos and brought the great Victor Harrington to tears. Lily received scholarship offers from Juilliard, the Royal Academy, and every major conservatory in the world. She received invitations to perform with orchestras in London, Vienna, Tokyo, and New York. Record labels offered her contracts worth millions of dollars. But the thing that meant the most to her was much simpler. Victor Harrington personally established a music education fund in her grandmother's name. The Mei-Ling Chen Foundation would provide free instruments and lessons to children who could not afford them, children who might have been told, like Lily was told, that their dreams were impossible. At the press conference announcing the foundation, Victor stood next to Lily and spoke to the reporters. "I spent 40 years being cruel to young musicians," he admitted. "I told myself I was maintaining standards. I told myself I was protecting the art form. But the truth is, I had become bitter and angry because I had lost something precious and never found it again." He looked at Lily and smiled. "This young woman reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. She reminded me that talent can come from anywhere. That dreams do not require expensive schools or famous teachers. That sometimes the greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packages." He paused. "Mei-Ling Chen never got to play for the world, but her granddaughter will. And I am going to spend whatever time I have left making sure that no other child with a gift is ever silenced the way she was." 1 year later, Lily performed at Carnegie Hall for the first time. She wore a simple blue dress, much like the one she had worn on that television stage. She carried her grandmother's violin, now carefully restored but still bearing its original scratches and marks. The concert hall was packed. Every seat was filled. Victor Harrington sat in the front row, tears already forming in his eyes before the first note was played. When Lily walked onto the stage, she paused for a moment. She looked out at the audience, at the thousands of faces looking back at her. She thought about her grandmother, standing alone in that empty laundromat, playing for no one. "This is for you, Grandma," she whispered, and then she raised her bow, and she played. And somewhere, somehow, Mei-Ling Chen was finally heard by the world.